She was 22 and sleeping inside the back seat of a faded gray hatchback parked beside an empty river dock. Every night, cold wind pushed through the cracked window seals and carried the smell of saltwater rust and wetwood into the car, where she slept beneath an old wool blanket. The river groaned softly against the old pier nearby. Loose chains knocked against metal poles in the darkness like distant footsteps. Her name was Nora Bennett, and everything she owned fit inside 2 canvas bags behind the driver's seat, 3 sweaters, a flashlight with weak batteries, a coffee tin filled with coins, and exactly $1 folded carefully inside her wallet. That dollar was the reason she had driven nearly 7 hours to a forgotten riverside town nobody talked about anymore. The old ferry office had been abandoned for over 30 years. Most people in the town wanted it demolished. The roof sagged. The windows were cracked. Half the building leaned toward the river, like it was tired of standing. But the county auction had ended with no buyers. Except her. $1. That was all it cost. People laughed when she signed the papers. Some shook their heads. One old fisherman even asked her quietly if she knew what happened there in 1978. She didn't. But what she didn't know was something inside that collapsing ferry office had been waiting for someone to come back for a very long time. And before the week was over, the entire town would start watching her differently, because strange sounds were already coming from beneath the floorboards. And Nora hadn't even spent her first night inside yet. Before we continue, if stories like this remind you that broken places and broken people can still hold something valuable, take a moment to subscribe. And if you've ever felt lost, forgotten, or forced to start over with almost nothing, leave a comment below. Sometimes the smallest stories carry the heaviest truths. Nora grew up beside water. Not oceans. Not beautiful beaches. Just a narrow working river in a tired industrial town where ferry horns echoed the fog every morning before sunrise. Her grandfather, Walter Bennett, spent 40 years working ferry routes across the Greyhaven River. He smelled like engine oil, tobacco leaves, and river water. His hands were thick and scarred from rope burns, and winters spent pulling frozen chains from docks before dawn. When Nora was little, she used to sit beside him on overturned crates while he repaired old navigation lamps inside his garage. The garage always smelled like sawdust and machine grease. Rain tapped softly against the roof while old jazz music played through a dusty radio near the workbench. Walter spoke slowly, never wasting words. Most people throw things away too early, he used to tell her while repairing cracked lantern glass. Boats, buildings, people. Nora remembered that sentence for years, especially later. Especially after her father left. After the medical bills came. After the bank took the house. Her mother worked double shifts at a diner near the interstate. By 16, Nora was already helping clean tables after school. Grease clung to her clothes constantly. She learned how exhaustion looked on adults. She learned how silence sounded in families carrying debt. But every Sunday, her grandfather still invited her to the garage. Even when arthritis twisted his fingers. Even when his breathing became heavier. He taught her small forgotten things. How to repair warped wood with steam. How to seal cracks against water damage. How to listen to buildings. Old places talk, he once told her. You just gotta stay quiet long enough. At the time, Nora laughed. Years later, she would remember every word. When Nora turned 19, her grandfather died during winter. The garage stayed locked afterward. Dust slowly covered the tools. And something inside her life quietly collapsed. Her mother moved away with a new boyfriend 2 years later. Phone calls became shorter, then rare, then gone. Nora tried community college for a while. But tuition kept rising. Rent kept rising. Everything kept rising except her paycheck. So she dropped out. For almost 3 years, she worked wherever she could. Gas stations, warehouses, late-night cleaning jobs. She learned how loneliness grows louder after midnight, especially inside empty buildings. Especially during long shifts when vending machines hummed louder than human voices. At 22, she lost her apartment after missing 2 months of rent. Her manager at the storage warehouse cut employee hours without warning. She sold furniture first, then jewelry, then almost everything else. Eventually, the hatchback became her home. Some nights she parked behind grocery stores. other nights near highway rest stops. She kept one photo taped inside the car visor. Her grandfather standing beside an old ferry dock in heavy fog. There was writing on the back in faded ink. Greyhaven River Ferry Office 1972. Nora stared at that photo constantly, especially during nights when sleep refused to come. One evening, while scrolling through county auction listings on library computers, she saw the address. Old Greyhaven Ferry Office. Minimum bid $1. The attached photo showed a crooked building near the river. Boarded windows. Collapsed dock. Tall weeds growing through broken concrete. Most people probably saw garbage. But Nora kept staring at the image. Something about it felt familiar, like a memory she couldn't fully reach. Then she noticed something else. In the corner of the auction photo, barely visible beneath layers of dirt, was the same old lantern design her grandfather used to repair in the garage. And suddenly, for the first time in months, Nora felt something dangerous. Hope. The drive to Greyhaven took nearly 7 hours. Rain followed her most of the way. The highway slowly narrowed into older roads surrounded by dying trees and abandoned gas stations. By evening, fog drifted across the riverbanks like smoke. Greyhaven itself barely looked alive. Most storefronts downtown were empty, paint peeled from old brick buildings. The diner windows were dark. Even the streetlights flickered weakly. People glanced at Nora when she stopped for coffee. Not curious, cautious. Like outsiders rarely came there anymore. The ferry office sat nearly half a mile outside town, beside the river. She reached it just before sunset. The building looked worse in person. The dock had partially collapsed into the water years ago. Tall reeds surrounded the structure. The ferry sign hung crooked above the entrance, swinging softly in the wind. One chain knocked rhythmically against a rusted pole. Clink, clink, clink. The sound echoed across the empty riverbank. Nora stepped inside carefully. The floor creaked immediately beneath her boots. Dust floated through beams of fading orange light. Old ticket windows lined one wall. A broken clock still hung crooked near the ceiling. Everything smelled like mold river water and ancient wood. But beneath all of that, something else lingered faintly in the air. Oil. Machine oil. Fresh enough to notice. Nora frowned. That made no sense. Nobody had worked there in decades. Then she heard it, a soft metallic sound somewhere below her feet. Not loud, just one quiet scrape beneath the floorboards. She froze completely. Silence returned. Only the river moved outside, slowly, darkly. Nora told herself the building was settling. Old buildings made sounds. Her grandfather said that all the time. Still, that night she slept inside the hatchback instead of the ferry office. And sometime around 2 a.m., she woke to a light glowing faintly inside the abandoned building. The next morning the light was gone. Nora walked through the ferry office carefully with her flashlight. Dust covered everything. No footprints besides hers. No electrical power. No sign anyone had entered. But near the back wall, she found something strange. One section of floor looked cleaner than the rest. Not fully clean, just less dusty, as if something had moved there recently. She knelt beside it. The wood felt colder, denser somehow. That same faint smell of machine oil drifted upward again. Then footsteps outside startled her. An old man stood near the dock, holding fishing nets. He introduced himself as Elias Mercer. He had lived in Greyhaven his entire life. When Nora mentioned buying the ferry office, his expression tightened immediately. "You should be careful in there," he said quietly. "Why?" Elias looked toward the river before answering. Some things were never explained properly. Then he walked away. That night rain hammered the roof hard enough to shake the building. Nora sat inside wrapped in blankets while reading old newspaper clippings she found stuffed inside cabinets. Most discussed ferry schedules and river accidents. But one article caught her attention. 1978 ferry shutdown investigation. The article was damaged and incomplete. Several lines were missing, but one sentence remained readable. Financial records disappeared the same week the office closed. Nora stared at the paper for a long time. Financial records. Why would records disappear? And why did the town still act nervous about the building decades later? That same night around midnight, she heard the metallic sound again, closer this time, directly beneath her chair. Scrape, then silence. Over the next several days, Nora slowly cleaned the building. Not because she had a plan, mostly because staying busy kept fear away. She repaired broken shelves, swept shattered glass, cleared weeds outside the entrance, and little by little more strange things appeared. An old map hidden behind warped wall panels, numbers carved beneath the ticket counter, fresh scratches on certain floorboards, and always that smell, oil, like old machinery still sleeping beneath the building. One afternoon, Nora visited the town library. The elderly librarian recognized the Ferry office immediately. "You bought that place," she whispered. Nora nodded. The woman hesitated before walking into a back storage room. She returned carrying a dusty ledger book. "Your grandfather used to come here," she said softly. Nora's chest tightened. "What?" "He researched ferry routes for years before he died." The librarian opened the ledger. Inside were handwritten notes from Walter Bennett, sketches, measurements, river depths, dock layouts, and one repeated phrase circled several times. Hidden below West Foundation. Nora stared at the words. Her grandfather knew something. Something he never told anyone. That evening she returned to the ferry office before sunset. Wind moved hard across the river. Dark clouds rolled above the water. Inside the building, the floorboards groaned softly beneath her steps. She walked directly toward the cleaner section near the back wall, then stopped. A tiny draft touched her ankle, cold air rising upward. From beneath the floor, her pulse quickened. She knelt slowly and pressed her ear against the wood. At first nothing. Then, very faintly, the distant dripping sound of water below. There was space underneath. A hidden space. Nora spent 2 days trying to remove the floorboards. Most were nailed tightly into place. Old rusted nails snapped constantly. Her hands blistered. Dust coated her face and hair. By the second evening, frustration nearly made her quit. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe her grandfather had simply gone obsessive during old age. But then she found it. One hidden metal latch buried beneath warped wood panels near the wall. Tiny, almost invisible. Her heart pounded. She pulled carefully. At first nothing happened. Then the floor shifted slightly with a deep wooden groan. Cold air rushed upward immediately. The smell hit her next. River water, rust, machine oil, and something older. Paper. Nora lifted the hidden section slowly. Darkness opened beneath her feet. A narrow staircase disappeared underground. She stood frozen for nearly 10 seconds. Listening. No sounds. Only dripping water below. Her flashlight trembled slightly in her hand. Then she started descending. Each step creaked softly. The underground chamber was larger than she expected. Stone walls, low ceiling, dust everywhere. Old electrical cables lined portions of the walls. Shelves stood against the far side covered by stained tarps. And directly in the center of the room sat a heavy iron safe. Nora stared at it breathlessly. The safe door was already slightly open, as if someone had once intended to return, but never did. Her hands shook when she pulled the safe door wider. Inside were stacks of old waterproof containers, metal cash boxes, bundles wrapped carefully in oilcloth, and beneath them all, dozens of sealed envelopes. Nora opened the first box carefully. Cash, old bills, thousands of dollars. She stepped backward immediately in shock. The second container held silver coins and jewelry sealed inside cloth bags. The third held something unexpected. Ledger books, detailed Ferry financial records dating back decades. And hidden beneath those records, a journal, her grandfather's journal. Nora sat directly on the cold floor. For several seconds, she couldn't breathe properly. The first page was dated 1981. Walter Bennett had discovered the hidden chamber years after the ferry office shut down. The missing financial records revealed corruption involving county officials who stole emergency river transport funds during the late 70s. Money disappeared. Investigations were buried. Witnesses stayed silent. The Ferry office eventually closed after the scandal quietly vanished. But Walter never exposed it publicly. Not because he feared the truth, because by then most people responsible were already dead or gone. Instead, he hid the records safely underground, waiting, preserving them. And near the final pages, Nora found a letter addressed directly to her. Her vision blurred before she even finished reading. If you found this, it means life probably became difficult. I wish I could have protected you from that. This place was never worthless. Neither are you. Some things survive storms longer than others. The money below belongs to the river workers whose pensions disappeared after closure. If nobody remains to claim it someday, use it to rebuild something honest. And if the world ever convinces you that you become broken beyond repair, remember what I taught you. Old things speak, but only to people willing to stay long enough to listen. Nora cried alone underground for nearly an hour, not because of the money, because for the first time in years, she no longer felt forgotten. The discovery changed everything slowly, not instantly. The money required legal investigations first. County officials became involved. Historians arrived. Lawyers reviewed the records. Some surviving ferry worker families eventually received compensation connected to the missing funds. The story spread through newspapers across the state. People suddenly cared about Greyhaven again. But Nora stayed careful. She repaired the ferry office one section at a time. New support beams, fresh windows, a repaired dock. Most days she worked alone wearing paint-covered clothes while river fog drifted across the water. Elias helped occasionally. So did the librarian. Sometimes local teenagers volunteered on weekends after hearing the story. Nora used part of the remaining money to transform the ferry office into a small river museum and workshop space. She restored old lanterns using the same techniques her grandfather taught her years ago inside the garage. Tourists slowly started visiting. Then more arrived. Businesses reopened nearby. The old diner turned its lights back on. For the first time in decades, Greyhaven felt alive again. But Nora's biggest change wasn't financial. It was quieter than that. She stopped sleeping in fear. She stopped feeling temporary everywhere she went. At night, she often sat quietly on the rebuilt dock, listening to the river move through darkness. The same river her grandfather once crossed before sunrise every morning. The same river that nearly swallowed the town's history forever. And sometimes when wind moved softly across the water, the ferry chain still knocked gently against the poles. Clink, clink, clink. Not haunting anymore. Comforting. People often think value only exists in things that already shine. New buildings, clean stories, successful lives. But hidden value usually lives inside neglected places. Inside people others stop noticing. Inside memories waiting quietly beneath years of dust. Nora didn't become wealthy because of luck alone. She stayed long enough to uncover what others abandoned too quickly. That was the real treasure. Not the money, the patience, the listening, the willingness to believe something broken might still matter. Nearly 2 years after buying the ferry office for $1, Nora stood alone on the dock during early winter sunrise. Fog rolled slowly across the river. The repaired ferry sign swayed gently above her. Warm light glowed through the office windows behind her now. The building no longer looked abandoned. Neither did she. A young girl visiting with her parents stopped near the dock and pointed toward the museum. Was this place really empty before she asked? Nora smiled softly. For a long time, the little girl looked confused. But why would anyone leave it? Nora glanced toward the river, then toward the old office her grandfather once photographed decades earlier. Some questions finally had answers. Others never fully would. But that was all right, because sometimes the most important discoveries are not hidden beneath floorboards or behind walls. Sometimes they're hidden inside people waiting for one reason to keep going. And years after sleeping alone inside a freezing hatchback beside the river, Nora finally understood something her grandfather tried teaching her all along. Broken things are not always finished things. Sometimes, they're just waiting for someone patient enough to come back for them. If this story moved you in any way, subscribe for more slow burn emotional mysteries like this one. And in the comments, tell us about a place, object, or memory you once thought was worthless, but later realized meant more than you understood at the time. Sometimes the things we almost abandon become the very things that save us.